My name is Matthew Hill, and I have a fighter's heart. To have a fighter's heart means to me what I constantly profess, and that is the message of be impossible. And this is the idea that when faced with extreme challenge, with extreme difficulty, in the face of something seemingly impossible, we become impossible ourselves, and we will do the impossible. So my fighter heart story began in February of 2013, 10 years ago from this year. And I was diagnosed with a very rare, very aggressive form of pediatric bone cancer called Ewing sarcoma. In the span of about 30 seconds, I had a doctor come in an office room and tell me that I had cancer, that I would be going through 9 months of very intensive chemotherapy, that I would receive an amputation of my right leg, and that I would not be going off to school in the fall with my friends. I was a senior in high school at this time. And when you hear something like that, really all you're left with is shock. And it's a very numbing feeling. There wasn't a lot of angry or sad for me right off the bat. There was just numb, confusion, lack of understanding. All of a sudden, I'm going from this day-to-day life of high school, looking at colleges, hanging out with my friends, and now I have cancer. I'm losing my leg, potentially losing my life in the next year. And for somebody who's never faced extreme challenge, there's no how-to guide, there's no book on how to tackle that, or at least wasn't something I had been exposed to at that time. And so I stayed in this kind of numb, confused stage for a while. And a couple months in, after starting chemotherapy, I realized I saw this opening, this unfolding of this support, this love and support from the community around me. And I'm so thankful because within me, a voice came out and said, people are watching you. And I don't know how or why that came about, but that message came in my head and I realized, wow, this is a powerful moment I'm in right now. It's an incredibly difficult moment, an incredibly terrifying moment, but it's a powerful moment that I'm in. People are watching me, and I can go about this two ways. I can do what people expect. I can shut down, I can kind of cower and not even necessarily show weakness, but I can let this situation control me. And I can let it break me down, shut me down, and I can lock myself away for the next year and go through this silently, taking the support, but not fully allow myself to face this situation. That was one option. The other option was people are watching me. This is a horrible situation, but I can use this to do something that people would never expect. I can show incredible strength, incredible passion, and pursue this situation, to tackle it, to face it in a way that nobody would expect, to become impossible. And that's the option I chose. That's the option I strived for. There were obviously very hard days along the way. Chemotherapy is absolutely brutal. It is the worst thing I have ever experienced in my life. People see that I'm an amputee and they think, wow, how did you overcome that surgery? How were you able to face that? How could you live with the thought of losing your leg? And I say, no, the amputation was the best part of 2013 for me because I got to be off chemotherapy for 3 weeks. Chemotherapy was that bad. My body reacted particularly harshly to this chemotherapy. Every single dose, I got weaker and weaker, and it gets to a point where it feels like it is stripping your humanity. I dealt with several side effects, some of the worst being mouth sores throughout my whole GI tract, my mouth, down my throat, into my stomach, that would start bleeding. They would get so bad I couldn't eat food, I couldn't drink water. I'd be rushed to the emergency room just to get IV hydration. Later, I started getting infections between every single treatment. I ended up with sepsis, and I'm in the ICU for 2 weeks, and then went back home, started chemo back up again. And all of this culminated to a head in October of 2013. I had a feeling. One thing I pride myself in is I've been able to become very in touch with my body, know what it's feeling, know what it's experiencing, and just be able to receive and interpret that. And in October of 2013, I was about to face my last dose of the hardest chemotherapy drug that I was receiving. And I had a feeling like, not that I couldn't do it, not that I wasn't capable of overcoming it, but I had a feeling that this was going to be bad if I received this dose. And so I called my whole medical team in, and to their credit, they spent an hour with me listening to my concerns, going through the pros and cons. And at the end, we decided, hey, this cancer is so aggressive, we need this last dose. Like, it's not to the point where this chemotherapy is more dangerous than the risk of not having it. And so I agreed. I got that last dose. And the day after I got that last dose, I had one of the best days I've had in a long time. I hung out with friends, was feeling good, high energy levels. And then the day after that, I woke up very sick, no energy. Basically, I would have enough energy to get up, run to the bathroom, or rather crutch to the bathroom, come back and sleep, just so I'd have energy to do that again in 2 hours. About the third cycle of that, I'm on the way back to my bed, and I don't make it. I completely black out and pass out on a couch. Fortunately, my mom was nearby to see it. She called my dad in, and everything went black for me. Next thing I know, I wake up to hearing my dad shouting my name. Slowly, I start to come to. I can hear the words he's saying, but I can't see anything. We didn't know it at the time, but at that point, my blood pressure had gotten so low that I could no longer see. I was somewhat conscious. I could hear. I had no vision. Fortunately, there was a local EMS crew passing by. They came, picked me up, rushed me to a local hospital, who life-flighted me to Nationwide Children's Hospital, which is where I received all of my treatment. And there I was rushed to one of their intensive surgical emergency department rooms, and an explosion of people erupted around me. Nurses, doctors, and it was the first time, because I've been in the ER several times, this was the first time I couldn't even keep up with what was going on. I had extreme abdominal pain, extreme weakness, extreme fatigue. I was in and out of consciousness, and it was the first time I kind of felt myself just surrendering to the circumstances that were around me. There were doctors running back and forth, people shouting. I had no idea what was going on. I'd done this so many times that it almost felt like a normal, ER trip occurrence to me. And then I looked back at the line of people waiting at the doorway, and I saw one of my oncologists, who was one of the brightest, happiest, most positive human beings I've ever encountered on this planet. And on his face, I saw a look of just pure dread. And that's the last thing I remember seeing. Now, what had happened was I had had a bowel perforation. The chemotherapy had literally eaten a hole through my colon. And I was so deep into chemotherapy, I had no immune system whatsoever. So I went into septic shock very quickly. By the time I got to Children's, I was facing multi-system organ failure. My liver, my kidneys, my heart was shutting down. When I arrived at the ER, my blood pressure was in the 60s over 10s. They couldn't get IV access on me. I was barely alive. Now, fortunately, I went to a facility that's able to do something called ECMO. ECMO is kind of a step beyond the ventilator. They put a catheter in your carotid artery. They put another one in your femoral vein. And this machine pumps the blood out of your body, filters it, oxygenates it, and pumps it back into your body. So it can act as an artificial heart and lungs. The idea of this is it simply keeps you alive, takes some stress off of your organs, and hopefully allows them to recover. But even though I was on this machine, things were not on the mend yet, because my blood pressure was still deathly low. All the drugs that we have access to increase blood pressure in these situations were not working, not at all. And 5 days in, my parents get told that I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to survive. And then there's one doctor that refuses to give up, that refuses to believe that I can't survive this. She stays up all night doing research, scouring, all of the medical literature for anything she can grasp at, any piece of hope for saving my life. And she found something. There's a drug called methylene blue, which is kind of an obscure drug. It's used for some obscure diseases and also used as a contrast dye agent. But it's got this interesting effect of being able to increase blood pressure. when no other drug is working, basically. And there's not a lot of data around it. There's just some case studies here and there. But I was in such a dire situation. She said, this is worth a try because there's almost no negative side effects to this drug. She took it to the hospital board, got compassionate care approved, and I received my first dose very quickly. And within a matter of days, my blood pressure is on the mend and almost back to normal, to the point that they can take me off of ECMO. I still remained on the high pressure ventilator for another 7 to 10 days, still remained on paralytics, and we just kind of slowly let my body heal. The whole time I'm in a coma, I'm experiencing horrendous hallucinations, some of the worst things I've ever witnessed. And so I have no idea what's going on. And when you come out of a coma, it's not like it is in the movies and TV shows where you wake up and your family's there and all of a sudden everything's good again. When you come out of a coma, it is horrifying. And you don't come out all at once. It comes in phases and waves. And so I spent a few weeks kind of in and out of the real world and my hallucinations. But the first moment I have of waking up and realizing that I am in reality, my mom and dad are there, and they are just sobbing with relief, with happiness that I'm alive. But I have no idea what just happened to me. I remember blacking out in the ER. I remember my hallucinations, and then I have no clue what happened to me. The main thing I knew and I realized was I couldn't move my arms and legs. You see, I'd been on paralytics for over 2 weeks at this point, and my body, my muscle had atrophied, broken down to the point that I couldn't even lift my own arm to scratch my nose. My dad had to do it for me. That day, I have a rehab doctor come in, and he's testing my strength. And he tells us, your strength is so weak, you'll likely never walk again. And this had such an impact on your body and your circulation that likely you'll never be able to function mentally independently again. Because the thing about ECMO is it puts, even though it can relieve some of that stress off of your organs, it causes massive circulatory damage. And especially 10 years ago, it was a newer thing we were not as good with. A lot of people who went on ECMO never came off of it. They never survived. And of the people who did come off of it, many face more amputation just from the fact they've had such high damage to their circulatory system. That can cause organ damage, that can cause limb damage, that can cause damage to the brain, memory, focus, and function. And so I have these doctors telling me, hey, you may never walk again. You'll likely never think again. They had psychologists coming in giving me tests, first grade level tests. I got asked to name 5 words that started with the letter D, and I could not do it. And that's a scary place to be. But the whole time, I have my father in my ear saying, no. This is what these doctors are telling you, but remember, you're going to be impossible. This is an impossible situation. This is something nobody should be able to face and overcome, but you're going to do it. And it wasn't easy. And there were times I didn't want to believe him, but he kept that message in my ear. And 2 weeks after that doctor told me I may never walk again, I took my first step. Granted, it was with the assistance of a walker, a couple people holding on to me, but I moved my legs. And I got on the iPad. I was doing all of these learning memory function tests, and I was working my brain, exercising my brain. As we figure out more and more what's going on with me, we realize I need to go into surgery. I get my stomach cut open for the first time, top to bottom, get half my colon taken out, get part of my intestine taken out. I'm left with an ileostomy. And once we get that repaired, they get my whole abdominal cavity washed out of the infection, then I can really start healing. I spent 2 months in the hospital. I spent 35 days with no food or water, all of my nutrition coming from IV. And after 2 months, I stood up and walked out the door of that hospital. And after doing that, this message of being possible was solidified within me. I realized, wow, there is no reason I should be here today. There's no reason I should be able to walk, that I should be able to function at all. But here I am. And I had a long way to go. I got out in December, and I wanted to go back to school the following August. So I had 9 months of rehab to put myself through. I remember my dad, as soon as we got home, he took me down to local Planet Fitness, got me a membership. I'd never worked out, I'd never trained in my life before. But he took me down there. I couldn't even walk without crutches at this point, but it's what I'm doing. They have these treadmills there that have massive, big, sturdy handrails on them. So I'd get on there, I'd put that treadmill at a 0.5 miles per hour, and I would just slowly step and step and step. And I did this for hours and months. And I built my gait up by doing that. I would get on the weightlifting machines and just start moving my body, get back in touch with it. I would be on studying and learning apps, trying to get my brain functional again. And 6 months after walking out of the hospital, I go back and get a job. And I start working, and then I'm able to start school in the fall. But it wasn't clear skies from there. You see, after chemotherapy, and especially after ECMO and nearly losing your life, it's hard to relate to just life in general. You don't view life the same way. And I did not yet have the emotional and spiritual intelligence to be able to understand that, to accept that. So I go off to college, and here's all these kids that just graduated high school. You know, I had to take a year off school, so they're a lot younger than me as well. And I realized, wow, I've had a very different life experience. And that doesn't make me better, or that doesn't make me different as a person, but it did mean that my view of the world was a lot different. And I had a hard time relating to those around me. That drove me into a very deep, dark, lonely spot. I had this uncontrollable fear of the darkness related to my hallucinations I had experienced while I was on ECMO. And I would lay awake at night. Sometimes I would get up and just wander the streets for hours till 3 or 4 in the morning, not even being able to escape my own brain, escape my fears, escape those hallucinations that hung with me. I found comfort in alcohol. And it wasn't so much the feeling of the alcohol that drove me to it, but it was more the lack of feeling, the escape. It was the only thing I found that could actually eventually make me go to sleep, pass out, and escape what I was facing. And I fell into that heavy for 3 years. Now, I was still functional. I still made sure I kept up with my commitments, but I was going down a very dark path with it. And I was basically escaping all of the pain and all of the fear I had experienced. And then in 2017, I remembered a promise to myself. And again, this came from within me, and I have no idea where it came from. There was no prompting, no urging. It just came from within me. When I had come home from being on ECMO, receiving the surgeries, the first thing I did was I opened my laptop and I looked and I Google searched, has an amputee ever run a half marathon before? Because to me at the time, that seemed like a totally inconceivable, impossible thing. Now, of course, hundreds, thousands of amputees have. And I just remember thinking, how is that even possible? Like, I can barely walk at this point. I can't walk without crutches, but here's all these people out there doing it. And I remember typing up an email to a group that was supporting me, following me at the time. And I told them, I said, hey, someday I'm going to run a half marathon. And then I forgot about it for years, until I'm in this point in college where I'm just trying to escape everything I've gone through. I haven't dealt with any of this. And I'm diving into alcohol to allow me to escape these fears. And again, it came up within me. Remember, you said you were going to run that half marathon. And it was a message, it was a feeling, it was something I could not escape. And I had no idea what I was doing. Like I say, I'd worked out, I'd trained mostly just to get my function back, but I was never an athlete in high school. I was never an athlete as a kid. And so I didn't know what I was doing, but I was able to get, somewhat of a low-level running blade. And I just went out and made myself run. And for 3 months, I ran as fast and as hard as I could every day. And that's not at all how you're supposed to train, but that's how I did it. And I needed that more for my mental, emotional, and spiritual health, far more than I needed that for my physical health. And in October of 2017, I ran the Columbus Nationwide Children's Half Marathon for the first time. And when I crossed that finish line, all of that feeling came back to me of this is what it's like to be impossible. This is what it's like to do the impossible. Do you remember this? You forgot this. And I came back home on a different path. That doesn't mean I totally 180 changed my life in that moment and never again fell back into my old ways, because I still had challenges, I still struggled, but I was on a different path. From there, I got a little more into running, ran a couple other half marathons, ran the Columbus Half Marathon again in 2018 had a much better performance, much better circumstances. And I was like, wow, look at the power of the human spirit, the human mind, the human body when they're aligned towards a goal. And I realized like there are absolutely no limitations that can't be overcome. We allow ourselves to believe these limitations, these things that are externally placed on us in most cases. And a lot of times it's very easy to accept those limitations because, well, we say, I can't go out and run. I can't go out and train. My doctor told me I can't. And I would never go in the face of medical advice. But I always encourage people to just ask the question, what if? You know, I'm told I can't do this, but what if I could? What might that look like? How would I start? And just explore a potential path in your brain. And from there, you know, maybe you can't go out and run, but maybe you can go out and take some walks. You can take these small steps to get things going. And once you get this process going, once you get on this path, you realize, wow, I'm capable of so much more than I ever dreamed myself to be. After that second half marathon, I got into weightlifting. From there, I discovered powerlifting, and that became my true passion in life. Powerlifting is all about how strong can you get? The bench press, the squat, and the deadlift. And the deadlift was particularly my favorite event. And really, it's just a barbell in front of you. How much weight can you pick up off the floor? And I remember the first time I ever deadlifted, I barely pulled up 135 pounds, which, you know, sounds like a lot of weight. And I was certainly excited about it at the time. But in the grand scheme of powerlifting, it's really not a huge feat for most people. And I trained at it hard for 4 years. I was learning, I was listening to podcasts, I was reading books, not only just about powerlifting and how to train for strength, but how to fix my mind, how to develop emotional intelligence, how to overcome these fears I'd run from for so long. And I just dedicated myself to the relentless pursuit of strength. Physical strength spoke so powerfully to me because when you build physical strength, it translates over to mental, emotional, spiritual strength as well. And that's what I needed so badly. So after my first year of powerlifting, I was barely deadlifting, you know, just under 300 pounds. And I told myself, you know what, someday I'm going to deadlift 500 pounds. And that to me at the time was just like that half marathon when I first approached it. There's no way a one-legged guy who's had 5 stomach surgeries, abs completely cut open, who's gone through ECMO, who's gone through chemo, there's no way he could do that. And so I dedicated myself to that path. And it took me about 2 years to get to the point of even feeling comfortable to try it. And even then, I failed my first attempt. And it took me another 6 months to come back. And in July of 2021, I deadlifted. I pulled up off the ground 500 pounds. And that was another phase of being impossible, of doing the impossible. And after that, I was actually facing at the time a lot of health challenges. When you go through what I've gone through physically, it has a serious, massive impact on your body and on your health. And I'd been powerlifting for so long with a compromised abdominal function. I actually had a big hole that was just covered up by a mesh. And in March of 2022, I actually did one of the lifts I'm most proud of, 495 pounds for 2 reps on deadlift. And after that lift, it actually wasn't the lift itself, but it was deloading the plates afterwards. I just moved wrong and I felt that whole mesh just pop, tear along my abdomen. And it hurt at the time, but it wasn't like searing agony. And, you know, me as I was like, oh, it's okay. Nothing happened. It was just, you know, a little tweak. And a couple days later, I'm headed back into the ER with massive abdominal swelling, massive pain. And of course, I'm terrified thinking, wow, I've got another perforated bowel, because it felt very similar. And I was mentally and emotionally facing and remembering and thinking, wow, I'm going through this again. Fortunately, all that had happened were my intestines had actually spilled out of my abdominal cavity, and they'd gotten kind of tied in knots, and that caused a blockage. So I just had to be on bowel rest for about a week or so, and it naturally resolved. But because of that, I got sent up to a local hospital that performed what's called a total abdominal reconstruction. It's a fairly new procedure, as I understand it. And basically he goes in and cuts me open top to bottom again and regrafts all of my abdominal wall. He cuts pieces out, puts them back together, and I like to think of it as like macrame. And I woke up from that surgery. For the first time in 10 years, I had a fully intact abdominal wall. I got to be a part of a study after that did 8 weeks of intensive physical therapy. And I learned how to use this abdominal wall, how to control it, how to allow it to give me more function, not just in day-to-day life, but also in athletic performance. And it was life-changing for me. I didn't realize how much function I'd lost just from not having a fully intact abdominal wall. And for the first time in 10 years, I was given this gift. And so coming out of surgery, I knew I was going to have to take time off powerlifting to really allow this core, this abdominal wall to heal. And all of a sudden, in October of 2022, it hits me. I'm going to be 10 years cancer-free next year. In 2023, I will be 10 years out from battling through the hardest thing I have ever faced. And I realized people are going to be watching you. And once again, I could do one of two things. I could either just go about it and, make my few thankful posts about it, thanking everybody for their support 10 years ago, or I could once again do the impossible, become impossible, and use basically this skill, this philosophy, this ethos I had built up to change my life, and more importantly, to change the life of countless others. Because I've been given so much. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be able to mentally or physically function. And I have a doctorate, and I've ran half marathons, and I've deadlifted 500 pounds. So now how can I use this gift to give back to others and to change their lives in the same way? And after I did my half marathons, they were so brutal. They were so intense. My residual limb was torn to shreds. I have pictures that looks like hamburger. Blood is spilling out of my socket when I finish those. And I think, wow, that's how a half marathon was. And after that, I thought I will never even try to do a full marathon because it probably wouldn't be safe for my health. But then after that abdominal reconstruction, I gained back so much function as wow. The body is capable of so much more. The human mind, the human spirit is capable of so much more. And in October of 2022, I decided this is what 2023 is going to be about. I needed to take time off powerlifting. I was in peak powerlifting phase before that surgery. So I have no cardiovascular function. I'm a pure strength athlete. Like I'm incredibly strong, but I can't go up a flight of stairs without getting winded. Not only that, I've got one leg. I'm fresh out of an abdominal reconstruction surgery. I have a rare glycogen storage disease that does not allow my body to use carbohydrates like most people can. So I'm running off of a very intense, specific performance diet. And I realize, wow, what can I overcome? And what would this do for people? What would this do for the people who follow me? And what would this do for the kids facing the very thing that I faced right now? If I could show them that in spite of everything you're going through, this is what you are capable of. And I realized in 2023, I'm going to run the full marathon. So in October of 2022, I decided in October of 2023, 10 years to the month after coming as close as you can to losing my life, I will return to the very same city to run a marathon sponsored by the very same hospital that gave me my life back 10 years ago. But I realized that alone is not enough because this journey is not going to be just about me. At this point, I need to be able to pass this along and instill it in others and do everything I can to give them a chance at reclaiming their lives and chasing their dreams just as I have been able to do. And so I decided along with that, in this marathon, Nationwide Children's sponsors it, and they do a fantastic job of allowing each runner the opportunity to raise money for a department of their choosing of research within the hospital. And so I sat down and I said, what's a number that scares me? Scares the crap out of me. Seems impossible. And I realized, well, I'm going to run 26.2 miles. I should raise $26,200. And at the time, to me, that seemed totally unreasonable, undoable, totally impossible. But I put my post up the day after the marathon happened in 2022. I put my post up and said, next year, this is what I'm doing. 10 years out, and we are going to raise $26,200 for childhood cancer research at Nationwide Children's Hospital. And then I started, and I was a terrible runner. I still had no idea how to run, but I gave myself fully into this process. At this point, I knew how to study, how to learn. I knew how to figure out, so I didn't know how to run at all, how to train for an endurance event at all, but I knew how to learn. So I just dive in, again, listening to podcasts, reading books, opening up connections, making every possible connection that I possibly can. And so much opportunity has come along the way. I've been so thankful for this journey. I've had so many high-level people helping me out in this sport along this process, getting me in the right prosthetic, getting me on the right kind of training style, getting me on the right kind of nutrition and fueling style. And I spent the first 5 months training thinking, there's no way I can do this. Like, in the back of my mind, I was like, this is not possible for me. But I kept training because I'd ask that question, what if I could? What would that look like? So I would go out. I'd do my quarter-mile run some days. That's all I could do. And then I built it up. My first 2-mile run was everything I could do. And I trained for 5 months, not even having the belief that I could do this, but I had done this enough that I knew all it took was the consistent, correct action over time. And that's what being impossible is about. I was facing the impossible, something I was not capable of doing. And I knew that. I was like, who I am now, I'm not somebody that can do this. But I'm going to put in the work, and I am going to grow and shape and build myself up into somebody who can. And then last month, I ran a 10-mile run right after we hit our $10,000 mark in fundraising. And that run had felt better than any run I'd ever taken in my entire life. When I finished, I felt like I could have gone forever. And that was the first time after 5 months of training that I realized, I think I can do this. And so sometimes in the face of the impossible, you have to tackle a challenge that you can't do, but you're going to build yourself into a person who can. And that's what it means to be impossible. So now I'm 6 months in. I have 2 half marathons coming up that I know I will have a best lifetime PR, and it'll be my best performance in a half marathon ever. I'm going to continue training throughout the summer and keep growing, keep building. And in October of 2023, I will return to Columbus with my whole team that I built up around me, with the massive support I've been given. And we will run the Columbus Marathon after having raised $26,200 for kids. This whole journey is not necessarily, a perfect story. Like I talked about my health journey, I have had several health challenges along the way. Right now, I have a current active GI bleed that I'm battling with. My hemoglobin and my iron, 2 things that are very important for heart rate stability and oxygen supply to the body. They're constantly bottoming out, up and down. And there's still some days now that because of health challenges, I can't go out and run 2 miles. And that's tough to face, but I know that these are things that can be overcome. And I'm not going to put myself in a position where my health is sacrificed, or I'm putting my life in danger. But I know that I'm not going to let something stop me just because it should. Because I've been told before, many times, that I can't do things. And I've overcome them through becoming impossible. And that's what I'm going to do just in this case. And that's how we're going to show up and run a marathon. And that's how we're going to raise $26,200 for kids. The biggest piece of advice I would have for somebody going through what I went through is that when you're faced with the impossible, something that seems like can never do it, you become impossible. Be impossible. You build yourself into somebody who is capable of tackling those challenges. And by the process of doing that, you will do the impossible. And Walt Disney himself said many years ago that it is so much fun. And I can certainly attest to that.